Mike says he's going to apologize ahead for this next demo. I believe this demo is me, so thank you, Mike. I always appreciate your support. So without further ado, here is more of me. Hey there, I'm Jason Logsdon from Amazing Food Made Easy and the International Sous Vide Association. I'm really excited to be a part of the dessert showcase in addition to emceeing it. I'm sure you've seen my face enough by now, but I wanted to share one of my favorite sweets that I put together. It can be served as a dessert, but I usually use it actually as an appetizer. It's alcoholic adult gummies. So I first got this recipe from Chef Steps. They have a lot of amazing stuff and do some really cool things with sous vide. And I took their recipe and I use it a lot for parties and get-togethers when, you could have parties and get-togethers still. But it's a great thing that you can put together with some flavored gummies, set them out so people can enjoy them as they're talking and mingling at the start of gatherings. But they also work great for any kind of desserts if you want to just have them out for people to snack on afterwards. And there's a lot of different varieties that you can do. So what these gummies consist of is pretty simple here. We have fructose, we have gelatin, we have corn syrup, and we have a flavored liquid to put in it. We're using port for these, and we're also going to make some with coffee if you want some non-alcoholic ones. You can use any sorts of liquids in these. I've done some with Amaros, I've done some with sangria, cocktails, anything that's pretty strongly flavored because you're going to be diluting it with a lot of gelatin and sugar. So it's going to turn out good with alcohol, gelatin, and sugar combined together. They're like adult Jell-O shots. That's how I like to think of them. So you can follow all the steps we're going to go through, and then you can come up with your own recipes for what liquids you want to use. So you can replace the liquid out one for one with pretty much any flavored liquid you'd like to use, as long as you keep the rest of the ratios the same. So think about the type of things that you like and the things that your friends like, but make sure it's a more strongly flavored liquid. So the actual process of making these is pretty easy. We take all the ingredients, combine them together in a mason jar, and cook them at 167 Fahrenheit for about an hour. You can go a little bit longer. The timing's not critical on this. Once they're fully cooked, you want to remove them from the sous vide machine, mix it together really well, and then you want to put them in silicone molds. So a lot of different types of silicone molds. There's ice cube trays you can use. There are ones with lots of neat little shapes. There are consistent shapes. And the silicone ones work really well because these are going to be sticky, chewy candies, and you can flip them out inside out, which helps a ton for unmolding them. Once you've put them in the molds, you want to put them in the refrigerator and let them sit for at least several hours, but I usually try to go at least overnight. It helps them form a little bit more. They unmold a lot more easily, and they're easier to handle the next day. At that point, you can either just eat them straight, or you can toss them in like a powdered sugar, cornstarch kind of coating to make them so they don't stick quite as much and make it a little bit easier for people to pick up and eat. Like I said, this recipe is heavily based on the Chef Steps recipe. They do a great job, and I recommend checking out their site if you haven't before. I also have this recipe on my site at amazingfoodmadeeasy.com. And if you want more party recipes, you can check them out on my Party Foods book that has a lot of modernist party foods. And that's at afmeasy.com/partyfoods. So let's get started making this. So to make these, you want to first heat your sous vide machine to about 167. That's what Chef Steps recommends, so that's what I've stuck with. I think you can play around with that some if you want to try to change the texture some, but I haven't done that myself because I'm usually doing this for a party and I want to make sure things turn out perfectly every time. So the first step is to bloom the gelatin. I've got everything measured out here ahead of time to make sure that you wouldn't have to sit here and watch me. So what we want to do is we want to take the liquid. In this case, we have port. And we have about a half cup of port here. Pour it in. Then we want to use the gelatin. We have 12 sheets of gelatin. You can also use gelatin powder, which is about 4 packets of Knox gelatin or 4 tablespoons of Knox gelatin. Either one works pretty well. I actually haven't used sheets before. I always use the powder, but I was out of powdered and needed to record this today. So we're going to bloom the gelatin. Not a ton of liquid here, so you want to make sure it's all getting in there, which is why I'm breaking them up a little bit. And that's one of the things that makes them really chewy, is that the ratio of gelatin to liquid is very, very close. There's a whole lot of gelatin in these. So while that's blooming, we'll mix together the next two ingredients. We have fructose, which is just a very sweet sugar. Normal table sugar has multiple components in it, and this is one of the components broken out, so you get its flavor just by itself. My understanding is that you can mix up the different ratios of the sugars in here depending on your sweetness, and if you make candies a lot or desserts, you might have a better feel for how this works than I do. Like I said, I follow the recipe because I want things to turn out well. So we take the sugar, the fructose, then we combine it with light corn syrup. And then we just mix it together. And the measurements on those were 2/3 of a cup fructose and 1/3 a cup corn syrup. You can measure a little heavy on the corn syrup and a little light on the fructose, and it should turn out just about perfectly. So just want to mix this together, kind of get out any of the big lumps in it. You can see it becomes this very viscous mixture. It still flows, but holds together pretty well. I'm going to give this a few more minutes to finish hydrating. When you're using sheet gelatin, it blooms and it still is together. You can kind of see that it clumps up, which is fine. If you use Knox powder gelatin, it's going to become almost the same consistency as the fructose mixture does. A little bit grainier, but it should absorb almost all of the liquid into it. So we take a normal mason jar and we want to fill it with the fructose corn syrup mixture. You can tell my aim is great there, as always. And it is thick and sticky, so your odds of getting it all out of the container are pretty low. So we used a little bit more in it when we originally built it. Gives us a little more room for margin of error, if you will. You can see there's still a lot in there, but almost impossible to get all of it out. So we measured a little more out at the beginning to compensate for that. Once we have that, we'll add in our hydrated gelatin. You can see that it did absorb almost all the liquid. Pour in the last of the liquid. And then we just want to finger tighten the lid. If you haven't finger tightened before, make sure you don't have any corn starch on the top there, or any fructose on the top. The way that I like to do it is I go until it sticks, and then I turn it back just a tad. You can see now that it's pretty easy to open with just my fingers, and that's the way you want it. If it's too tight, the air can't escape if pressure builds up, and you could run into troubles. So that's what goes into building one. It's pretty simple. I'll put together the coffee one now as well. So now we have our two containers. We are ready to go. We'll put them in the sous vide machine for an hour, and then we will come back. And after a long wait of an hour, we have finished cooking our mixtures. We have gelatin, fructose, corn syrup, and it's flavored, one with port and the other with coffee. You can see they're a lot more liquid now. They're pretty hot, so you want to be careful. But you can see there's a lot more liquid and they move around a lot more than they did going into it. So what you want to do is let them cool slightly so you can handle them without burning yourself. Then we're going to stir them to combine them. You can see they combine together pretty easily there. Smaller spatula would probably work a little bit better, but we work with what we have. Want to make sure everything's mixed together very well. And then I like to pour them into squeeze bottles. They work really well for dispersing it into the molds, but if you don't have squeeze bottles, you can just pour them directly or use a spatula. You will end up spilling more, but not too big of a deal. And we're ready to stir the second one. Remember to be careful, this is hot. This is why you let it sit for 5 to 10, 15 minutes so it cools off enough that you can handle it without burning yourself. Last thing you want to do is get really, really hot sugar on you. If you've ever made caramel and spilled, you know what I'm talking about. Make sure to scrape the bottom a little bit to get anything that's down there kicked up to the top so it mixes really well. If it's easier, you can use a funnel to pour, whatever makes it easier for you to pour it into here. That is port. I like to use a normal sheet pan when I'm going to fill the molds. So we're going to do the square molds and the red molds, and a few of the straight blue ones. So you'll be able to see the consistency here as it comes out. It is pretty liquidy right now. Having it on the sheet pan also makes it easier to move to the fridge where they're going to have to store for a little bit. If you have it if this is just filled with liquid, it is really hard to keep it from spilling all over the place. Fills it up almost perfectly, which is nice. Slide that one aside. Now we'll use the brown ones to finish off our liquids. These are a little bit bigger, so I'm filling them all the way up, but once they come out of the refrigerator and have been set, I'm going to quarter them actually. So most of these you can cut once they've completely set, so you have a lot of options for the different shapes you might want to use when you're serving them. Put the last of the coffee one in as well on the other side. Might as well use every drop of it. So I like to let these sit just for a few minutes to firm up a little bit, and then I will throw them into the refrigerator. Now that they've been sitting a few minutes, we're going to get them ready for the refrigerator. I like to put a little saran wrap on so the smells of the fridge don't go in and they don't evaporate or dehydrate too much in the fridge. You still want to be pretty careful because, as you can see, it's still wet and it will stick a little bit, and that's generally okay. That's why we let it sit for a little bit first so it doesn't stick quite as much. You can see I spilled. It will happen. Don't worry about it. Now, if you're anything like me, the hardest part of this recipe is finding room in your refrigerator for it. Let's make sure I've got some. Now we're going to let it sit in there for at least 4 to 6 hours, preferably overnight. The more firmly it sets, the easier it is to unmold, the easier it is to handle at the end. So I'm going to see you all first thing in the morning. Okay, so it's been going on 6 or 7 hours. I lied, it's not the morning, but my wife is working tonight, so I figured we could pull them out and give them a shot. So what we're going to do is first unmold them and then toss them with a mixture of about equal parts powdered sugar and cornstarch. You can see sometimes they just come right out. So good. You can see how stretchy it is. Nice and chewy. We're going to take a bowl. You can mix up this ratio as much as you want to. I normally go about equal parts though, because that's nice and easy. First was cornstarch, second is powdered sugar. Mix it together really good. And then we can start unmolding. You can see with the silicone molds, it makes the process pretty easy because they basically pop out. You pull them out. See, we have got the nice design in there. Once they're in the powdered sugar, you just want to mix them up. Make sure they are evenly coated. Then I recently heard that you can use a normal sieve to knock the sugar off pretty well. So we're going to give that a shot. There. So there is one version. We'll now unmold the blue ones. A little hard to get started. Once you do, come right out. So these you could serve as is if you wanted, but as I mentioned, you can also cut them afterwards. So what I like to do with these, space them out a little bit. Cut them into about 1 inch long pieces. The coffee tastes great. And the final ones are the square ones. And as I said, we're going to cut these as well. If you have a pastry brush or something, you can brush them off, but I'm usually too lazy. So my friends get a little extra coating on it, which is one reason why I use a little more powdered sugar. It tastes a little bit better than cornstarch does. So you could cut them in half if you wanted. So they would be about the same size as the snakes we did. Or you can cube them, which is what I generally prefer. I want to make sure they're still coated on all sides. I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and then I'll show you a few of the different ways that I plate them. So as I said, there's a few different ways you can plate this depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Put together some quick ones to give you a few ideas. So what I normally do is serve them at parties so they're nice and casual. Just put them in a bowl, either with some toothpicks to pull them out, or you can just use your hands. They don't stick together and they don't get you too dusty at this point. But if you're doing a party that's a little bit fancier, but there's still people mingling around and you want to have things out, you can do something more like this, where they're going to be laid out. They look really nice, but they're not just in a bowl. They're still easy to grab, nice and casual. You can just pick them up with your fingers, but they're not just kind of piled in a bowl like the other one was. You could also do a sort of tasting if you wanted to do it as part of a meal. Similar to this one, you could have 3 different styles, 3 different flavors, 3 different shapes, and you could plate them so people could have them kind of to finish off the end of the meal, be a nice dessert or kind of a palate cleanser before some chocolate cake or something heavier that someone's making. Finally, you can use them as garnishes. Something like this, that you can have some other dessert that you use these as a topping or a garnish to just kind of add a little bit of texture, a little bit of visual appeal to it, and make it a little more unique than what someone's going to be used to. So those are the few of the ways that you can use the gummies. I hope you had a good time learning about them. They're one of my favorite things to make for parties because people love them. They're so different and unusual from what people are used to. So I hope you have fun experimenting, come up with a few of your own. Make sure you take pictures of them and tag me with hashtag Amazing Food Made Easy and hashtag the ISVA. So I'm Jason Logsdon from Amazing Food Made Easy and the ISVA. I hope you enjoy the rest of the showcase.